In a discussion with a Swedish journalist Ingrid Carlqvist from July 2016, Gad Saad, a Lebanese evolutionary behavioral scientist at the John Molson School of Business, Montreal, Canada, known for applying evolutionary psychology to marketing and consumer behavior, said that Swedish culture has castrated its men through social engineering programs like gender-neutral pronouns, etc. And he asks what happens when a culture which has rejected many of the traits typically considered masculine clashes with one that is very masculine and dominant, like the ones in the Arab world. For Carlqvist, Swedish feminists, politicians and journalists have indeed castrated the Swedish men. In fact, there are no real men left in Sweden, she says. They are all scared of saying what they think and of acting on their convictions. And so it is hardly surprising that no Swedish men are protecting women from being raped and harassed. Certain things that have happened in Sweden in the last few years, like the police distributing bracelets to girls with the text "Please don't touch me" in Swedish as a sign to rapists not to leave them alone, or the police driving around in their police cars handing out teddy bears to children, certainly seems to indicate a demasculinization of society. But is there any real scientific evidence? Gert Hofstede, Professor Emeritus of Organizational Anthropology and International Management at Maastricht University in the Netherlands, developed what is called cultural dimensions theory. His model explains national cultural differences and their consequences along 6 dimensions: power distance, individualism versus collectivism, uncertainty avoidance, masculinity versus femininity, long-term orientation, and indulgence versus restraint. According to Hofstede, there are national and regional cultural groups that influence the behavior of societies and organizations. Hofstede is currently the most cited social scientist in Europe. According to Hofstede, power distance is the extent to which less powerful members of institutions and organizations expect and accept that power is distributed unequally. Sweden scores low, a score of 31 out of 100, signifying a decentralization of power, informality, independence and equal rights, and dislike of control. Communication is direct and participative. Managers respect the experience of their employees, and these expect to be consulted. Individualism is the degree of interdependence a society maintains among its members of defining one's self-image as an I or as a we, and whether one is supposed to look after oneself or be looked after by a group to which one belongs. Sweden scores 71, which makes it fairly individualist. Swedes tend to prefer loosely knit social frameworks. Uncertainty avoidance means feeling threatened by ambiguous or unknown situations and creating beliefs and institutions that try to avoid these. Sweden scores 29 and thus has a low preference for avoiding uncertainty. Practice counts more than principles. There is tolerance for deviating from the norms. There should be no more rules than necessary, and these may be abandoned or changed. Precision and punctuality are not stressed. Schedules are flexible. Long-term orientation means maintaining links with the past while dealing with the challenges of the present and the future. Normative societies score low on this dimension. They stress traditions and norms and tend to be hostile to societal change. A high score means encouraging thrift and efforts in modern education as a way to prepare for the future. Sweden scores 53 and thus there is no clear preference. Indulgence means weak control, whereas restraint signifies strong control, and they mirror the way we are raised and socialized. Sweden has a fairly high score of 78, indicating a willingness to act out one's desires, a positive attitude and optimism. Leisure time and freedom are considered important. Lastly, masculinity means wanting to be the best as opposed to liking what you do. A masculine society is being driven by competition, achievement and success, meaning being the winner or the best in a field, at school as well as at work. A feminine society, on the other hand, is characterized by caring for others and stressing quality of life as a sign of success. Standing out from the crowd is not seen as admirable. In feminine societies, managers strive for consensus and people value equality and solidarity. Conflicts are resolved by compromise through long discussions. Moderation is an important value, neither too much nor too little, and above else not too noticeable. And for this reason people are to be kept in place and prevented from boasting and lifting themselves above others. Sweden scores 5 here and is therefore extremely feminine. According to SAD, Sweden scored the lowest on masculinity of all countries worldwide in the study, which of course is significant. However, the definition of masculinity that Hofstede gives is very limited, since it concerns competitiveness only. Masculinity as traditionally understood also includes things like independence and fearlessness, and independence is linked both to the Hofstedian dimensions of power distance and individualism. As a person who was born in Sweden and spent my first 24 years there, I agree with Hofstede that the Swedes probably score low on power distance, but not that they score high on individualism. The Swedes are clearly much more collectivist than the Germans, for example, and they are often called the Japanese of Europe. And as stated, masculinity requires fearlessness, and I do not agree with Hofstede that the Swedes have a low preference for avoiding uncertainty. If we compare Sweden with Germany, in Sweden it is mandatory to have the lights on when driving a car in full daylight, which is not the case here in Germany. Alcohol can only be sold in special shops and not in the supermarket, and there have long been demands on making the bicycle helmet mandatory for adults. There has been no such discussion here in Germany. Furthermore, a willingness to act out one's desires, a positive attitude and optimism is hardly something one associates with most Swedes. Many, if not most, Swedes suffer severely from the mentality of forced adjustment and their consensus culture, and Swedes returning back home from holidays abroad have been reported saying that it's time to put the mask back on. I've been living abroad for the last 20 years, and there are reasons for that. Not acting out one's desires, a negative attitude and pessimism we normally associate with fear, and so indulgence as well is linked to our standard definition of masculinity. The extremely low score of 5 for the dimension of masculinity in Hofstede's study thus comes as surprising, given the rest of the scores. It makes me suspect that Hofstede based his study on just a few characteristics of the Swedish mentality and way of life, ignoring others as well as the connections between and overlapping of the 6 dimensions. In any case, he's certainly right in his claims that the Swedes are extremely unmanly or extremely feminine, depending on the perspective, although his scope felt very limited. And thus it is hardly surprising that young Muslim men who come to Sweden find only weaklings there, and that they draw the conclusion that it's their duty to take over the country. As Saad formulates it, in the Arab world, Western society is regarded as a female who is to be mounted. At least concerning Sweden, this appears to be true.